Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of every Adventure Time villain backstory, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. In the quiet of Oo's strange history, where laughter and candy often mask a broken world, there exists one presence that feels older than everything else. A shadow that does not joke, does not stumble, does not yearn for love or friendship. A figure that seems carved from silence and decay itself. This is the Lich. The Lich is unlike any other villain in Adventure Time. While others may have stories of love lost, thrones desired, or kingdoms ruled with cruelty, the Lich is something more fundamental. He is not simply bad or wicked or greedy. He is the embodiment of death and the void, the force that waits patiently at the edges of all life. To speak of his backstory is not to describe a childhood or a personal wound, but to trace the story of evil itself in the land of Oo. We are told that he was born in the fires of the Mushroom War, a cataclysm which scorched the old world and left behind a strange, mutated landscape for the future to inherit. Where others saw ruin, the Lich was awakened. A flash of nuclear fire cracked the sky, and in that moment, something ancient stirred. The Lich was not created in a laboratory, nor shaped by the hand of a parent. He emerged as a consequence of humanity's final mistake, an echo of destruction so strong that it formed a being with will and hunger. Think of him as the last breath of the old world, given shape and terrible purpose. His form is skeletal, with deep, empty eyes, as if he carries the death of millions within his frame. His voice is low, steady, never needing to raise itself, because true evil does not shout. It whispers, patient and inevitable. In many ways, the Lich's backstory is inseparable from the Mushroom War itself. Every ruined city, every half-buried remnant of technology, every scar across the land is part of his origin. The Lich is both a product and a reminder, a creature whose existence proves that violence has consequences, that destruction lingers even when the war is over. Yet what makes the Lich so unsettling is how universal. Unlike other villains, he has no interest in ruling or reshaping the world into his own image. He is not a king demanding loyalty, or a wizard chasing power, or a trickster seeking amusement. The Lich is emptiness. He wants only one thing, the end of all life. That singular focus is what makes him chilling. There is no bargaining, no distraction, no flaw to exploit. His backstory is a straight line leading toward silence. We see hints of this throughout his appearance, the way he infects others, slipping into their minds and bending them toward his will, the way his very presence seems to wither the ground around him as if nature itself recoiled. It is not so much that he chooses to be cruel, that cruelty is his essence. Where the Lich walks, flowers do not bloom. Where he speaks, laughter fades. But his tale stretches further still into realms beyond Oo. For though we first meet him in the ruined dungeons of the present day, the Lich's influence ripples across time and space. There are echoes of him in the multiverse, alternate forms and endless battles where heroes rise only to face his inevitable hunger. Each variation carries the same seed, a being born not of love or ambition, but of pure negation. And so, in speaking of his backstory, we are not just recounting one villain's tale. We are touching the edges of a myth older than kingdom, older than candy, older even than Finn and Jake's simple joy. The Lich is the reminder that every world, no matter how sweet or silly, has a shadow that waits at its heart, a shadow born from fire, silence, and the longing of the void. We meet him first as a rumor in the dungeon air, a pressure in the stone, a feeling that the torches cannot quite hold back. The heroes move carefully, but the story is already moving with them. The Lich does not hurry. He waits and lets others take the steps that open doors for him. In a world where many villains announce themselves with banners or boasts, he prefers the patient route, a whisper to a weak heart, a small push to a hero who is too eager, a plan that unfolds at the pace of gravity. There is a cruel elegance to the way he approaches artifacts and thresholds. The Enchiridion, so bright in the hands of the pure, becomes a perfect key when guided by his will. He gathers the scattered gems, not with fanfare, but through careful nudges and tragic disguises. The most haunting of those disguises is the fate of a beloved champion. The Lich does not challenge strength in the open when he can wear the face of victory instead. When an old hero returns with kind eyes and words that sound like comfort, the world sighs in relief. But inside that familiar shape waits the oldest hunger. This is how the Lich passes through guarded doors. He borrows trust and converts it into access. The way he works upon minds is almost ritual. He never shouts commands. He suggests. He leans. He lets hope do the heavy lifting until hope becomes the bridge he crosses. Even the smallest beings can carry him forward. A tiny figure that waves cheerfully in the background becomes a vessel. A casual wave becomes an omen. In this, the Lich shows that villainy is not always a storm from the horizon. Sometimes it is the quiet presence that rides along with you, smiling until the moment the smile drains from its eyes. When the gates between worlds begin to shift, we sense that the Lich is reaching for something beyond a throne. He seeks the places where rules are written. He wants proximity to wishcraft and time, not to build but to end. The time room, the careful dreams of a friendly god, the delicate balance of possibility, all of it becomes a target only because it contains the power to finalize silence. The Lich understands that to unmake a world, one must approach the heart of its choices. He is drawn to any room where a single sentence might change everything. Yet the cosmos does not give itself up without resistance. Wishes turn sideways. Paths that appear straight reveal hidden bends. When the Lich presses against the fabric of reality, the fabric answers. It places him where endings are kept under watch, a cold fortress where crimes too enormous for any land contained inside living stone. The citadel stands as a kind of memory of justice, but even there the Lich feels at home. It is still a place of ending. He walks its halls like a pilgrim of ruin, and even the guardians take him seriously. He has no crown, but all authority recognizes him because death recognizes its own reflection. The citadel is where his nature is shown in full. He does not gloat, he deconstructs. With a single touch, he reminds a guardian of the truth it tries to hold back, that even protector can fail. The stone bleeds, the halls crack. In the tremors of that prison, we realize that the Lich is not a person in a suit of bone. He is a principle that wears a body for convenience. Where other villains are defined by desire, he is defined by subtraction. Remove laughter, remove breath, remove memory, remove every light and every lingering sound. And then something unexpected happens. In the midst of his greatest reach, a different kind of force touches him. It is not a sword or a spell made for killing. It is restoration in liquid form. A flood that wants to repair what is broken rushes over him, and the Lich cannot be repaired while remaining the Lich. The magic does not argue, it simply applies its nature. Where the Lich embodies the end, this healing power embodies return. It insists that every wound is a beginning, even if the beginning is small and soft and confused. The Lich shrinks into an infant, not a disguise, a genuine rebirth. This is one of the strangest and quietest turns in his backstory. The greatest horror in the land becomes a child with wide eyes. He is gathered up not by warriors, but by gentle hands from an ordinary life. A couple that loves simple things, who believe that a baby who cries deserves comfort. They give him a home and a name that sounds like sweetness and hope. In this domestic light, the story asks a question that only Adventure Time would dare to whisper at bedtime. If evil is given safety and love from the start, does it remain itself? If the void is wrapped in a blanket and rocked to sleep, can the morning hold something different? For a time, the answer appears to be yes. The child grows. He laughs. He plays. In his presence, the trees are not afraid. In the schoolyard, he is clumsy and kind. But the past is not gone. It is only sleeping inside him. On certain nights, when the air is thin and a silence deeper than ordinary night slips through the window, a voice wakes inside his chest. It does not belong to the boy. It belongs to the old shadow. It reminds him of deserts without stars and oceans without waves. It calls him by a name that has no love in it. These moments are the most delicate threads in the Lich myth. The show lets us linger with the child as he listens. He does not answer the old voice. He holds to the life he has learned. He remembers warm dinners and the soft green of a backyard. He remembers that gentle hands chose him before they knew anything about him. He remembers that goodness can be a decision. When the whisper grows stronger, he does not fight with anger. He meets it with a memory of light. This is not an easy victory. It is a nightly practice. It is the opposite of the Lich in every way, because it is patient love instead of patient hunger. In these scenes, the backstory becomes a question about what evil really is. Is it a constant that cannot change, or is it a habit that can be unlearned when the world refuses to feed it? The Lich began as the last breath of a dying age. He was a reaction to human pride and violent fire. But now he is also a child who holds a crayon and draws a house with smoke curling from the chimney. He contains both truths at once. The story does not rush to decide which one will win. It lets us rest inside the uncertainty and watch how small good things accumulate. He once wore the victory of others like a mask. The noblest hero fell, and the Lich slipped into that familiar shape and spoke with a voice that sounded like comfort. He guided pure hearts towards the Enchiridion, invited them to gather jewels that glittered like promises, then tilted those promises toward a doorway. Keys for seekers became hinges for an ending. In this part of the tale, heroism itself is the road the Lich prefers, because roads built by hope are often the straightest. The time room listens when a worthy traveler arrives. Wishes hum there like strings on a quiet instrument. The Lich came near those strings through the hands of others. He did not need to seize the room with force, only to stand close enough that a single wish could become the instrument of ending. To erase life in one sentence is the dream he carries, not a dream of gardens or kingdom, but a clean and final hush. The universe, however, has a way of answering precision with mischief. Wishes bend, guardians wake, sleep is broken and restored in rhythms that are older than any villain. Finn and Jake, kind and stubborn, step into this rhythm and disrupt his straight line. When a godlike friend is forced to sleep forever, the room changes shape. Finn makes a wish that unthreads history into something safer, a path where the Lich never forms from the war. That branch of reality grows a different forest. No Lich, no slow poison in the soil. Yet the world is not healed only by subtraction. In that new branch, dangers bloom from other seeds. The Lich becomes a possibility that waits just out of sight, ready to condense again wherever despair and old fire collide. We learn from this that the Lich is not merely one person in one place. He is an outcome that many timelines can approach. Remove him, and reality tries to forget him. But forgetting is not the same as learning. There are worlds where the cold math of ruin still adds up to the same answer. There are doors that look sealed until grief pushes on them in just the right way. In this wider view, the Lich is a contour on the map of fate, a low place where rivers of fear naturally collect. When the story circles back toward U, the mask of the hero finally crumbles. The Lich stands revealed, patient and tireless. He reaches for the citadel because he understands that prisons for vast crimes contain vast material. If he can unwind the foundations there, then everything built on those foundations will sway. He moves through that fortress like a quiet tide, touching stone and biology with the same intention, to remind matter that stillness awaits it. The Guardians resist with a power older than kingdom, a living order that seals wounds by becoming a river of healing. The river pours over him and refuses his definition. The Lich cannot remain himself inside a magic that insists on repair, so he diminishes, not into dust, but into a beginning. The child he becomes is not a metaphor placed on top of him. It is a true resetting of form that leaves only a silence in his memory. A couple meets that silence with kindness. They do not ask for lineage or history. They give him a small name and a bright room and toys that make bouncing sound. He learns please and thank you. He learns that a fall on the sidewalk is met with a bandage, not with laughter. He learns that night is a place for stories and warm drinks. These lessons are not flashy, but they are heavy. They weigh against the old pull inside him. From time to time, that pull announces itself. A chill crosses the floor, and the boy feels an outline inside his thoughts that does not belong to the day he just lived. He stands at the edge of a playground and stares at the line between grass and shadow. Something in him remembers wastelands and the last hint of a sun. The show allows this moment to breathe. We are invited to imagine how it feels to be given a new life while carrying a name that once meant extinction. We watch him choose again and again, not with speeches or battle, but with small action. He keeps a promise. He shares a toy. He says, "I am fine," and he means it. Then adds, "I am trying," when the old voice is loud. The story then places a test in his path. A whispering presence seeks to wake the buried shape. A reminder arrives, not as a grand army, but as words that know exactly where to press. The boy hears what he used to be and is asked to accept it as only truth. This is a different kind of battlefield. There are no trumpets, only breath and heartbeat and memory. He answers with what he has been taught at the kitchen table. That care received can become care given. That fear is not a command. That a future can be drawn with crayons before it becomes real. His choice does not erase the past. It repositions it. The Lich remains a fact of the world, a history that cannot be edited away. Yet within that fact lives a counterfact. The same universe that once produced a being of pure end can also produce a home where a name is spoken softly, and a child looks up and smiles. In this balanced place, the backstory becomes a meditation. The Lich is an ancient reaction, while the child is a recent decision. Both exist, and the tension between them is the quiet engine of hope. We return for a moment to the older chapters because they continue to inform the present. The hero who was worn like a glove reminds us that trust is a resource and must be renewed with attention. The Enchiridion reminds us that sacred objects are only as safe as the hands that hold them. The Time Room reminds us that power which grants wishes requires humility to manage. These are not warnings meant to disturb sleep. They are soft lessons, placed like small stones along a path, so that feet find steady ground in the dark. As we step through these lessons, the image of the Lich changes shape in the mind. He is no longer a simple monster waiting in a cave. He is a story about endings that learned for a while to wear a different story about beginning. The sight of the child playing with friends does not cancel the memory of barren field. It frames them. It says that even if a shadow once walked here, light has measured the room and decided where to rest. The child falls, stands, and laughs. Somewhere far away, an old silence listens and does not win that day. The multiverse continues to whisper its variations, other paths, other rooms, other near endings. Yet the heart of this segment remains close to the ground. A boy with a small backpack, a home with a front porch, a sky that holds both dusk and the first star. The ancient darkness is still part of the fabric, but it is not the only thread. The weave includes meals, friendships, and secret hopes that are gentle enough to hold in the palm. In that weave, the Lich becomes legible, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a truth to be understood and set beside other truths that are kinder. The Lich carries a certain vocabulary of images, and those symbols tell his story even when he is silent. The withered horn that crowns his skull, the tattered cloak that trails like nightfall on a still pond, the green fire that does not warm, only reveal. When he lifts a hand, finger bones seem longer than they should be, as if reaching for a future that belongs to no one. Where he moves, candles gutter, and the air feels hollow, as though the room itself is remembering what it will be like when it is empty. Even his servants and accidents are part of the backstory. The small waving snail that appears and reappears across adventures feels like a child of fate until the day it turns its head, and we see that older purpose looking out. Possession in this world is rarely loud. It is a slight tilt of posture, a new patience in the eye, a smile that holds still a heartbeat longer than smiles usually do. Through that tiny living doorway, the Lich teaches a quiet lesson. Endings do not always march. Sometimes they ride in a pocket, and wait for a greeting. The earth of Oo has learned to read him. Forests answer his presence by leaning away. Bones in deep places shift as if listening for orders. Old machines that should not wake begin to hum, called by a frequency that is older than their design. The Lich does not negotiate with kingdoms because kingdoms are only temporary. He speaks to deserts, to salt, to dust. He is fluent in a language that everything will eventually learn if given enough time. This is why his eyes unsettle even the bravest. They reflect a day that will come for all things, and they bring the taste of that distant day into the present. Heroes resist him not only with weapons, but with definition. Finn names what he is fighting. Jake names what he loves. Princess Bubblegum names the structures that protect a community. Marceline names memory as a shelter and a warning. Prismo names choice as an art that must be practiced. Each name is a thread, and together they weave something that can hold against silence for a while. None of these threads erase the Lich. They give people a way to stand with their backs to one another so that the circle does not break. The relationship between the Lich and the Mushroom War is not simply cause and effect. It is a mirror. Humanity once tried to master forces it did not fully understand, and the world assembled a witness out of that mistake. The Lich is that witness, walking slowly through the centuries, pointing to ash and saying that this is what careless power becomes. He is terrible, yet he is also instructive. He teaches the cost of unconsidered ending. He shows what happens when a story forgets its living characters and only counts its numbers. His voice matters. It is calm, low, and precise. It does not wobble or plead. It offers conclusion as if it were the only honest path. When he tells someone to stop breathing, there is almost a mercy in the way he says it, as if he believes he is freeing them from confusion. That confidence is part of what makes him so hard to move. You cannot argue with the cliff by asking it to be a meadow. You must build ladders, mark trails, plant seeds at the bottom and the top, and then invite everyone to walk together. The show understands this, and so the battles with the Lich are never only about striking. They are about holding each other in the moments when the air grows thin. The transformation into a child remains the brightest question in his history. The boy wakes in a home that does not know what he once was, and love arrives without needing a reason. He learns that mornings can be rituals of cereal and sunlight, that school can be uncomfortable and still worth returning to, that apologies can change the shape of a day. Each of these small truths is a medicine that does not claim final victory. It claims daily practice. The Lich once practiced ending. The child practices beginning. Both require devotion. One empties the world. The other fills a table and asks if anyone else is hungry. This balance does not make the Lich gentle. It surrounds his story with context. When we remember him as the quiet of a battlefield after the last banner falls, we also remember him as a boy who hears a bedtime story and tries to keep his eyes open long enough to say thank you. The contradiction does not cancel itself. It teaches us to look closely at the weight of moments. A single act of care does not erase an ancient evil, yet an ancient evil cannot erase a single act of care. They coexist, and the human heart chooses repeatedly which lesson to hold. Across other branches of the multiverse, versions of this struggle repeat. There are places where he is never softened by healing, places where heroes never gather the right name, places where the citadel never cracks, places where it cracks too early. The pattern is not meant to frighten us. It is meant to show that meaning is made everywhere, that courage appears in countless rooms and takes many shapes. Sometimes it looks like a sword being raised. Sometimes it looks like a parent lifting the sleepy child and carrying them inside. If we return to the beginning and glance once more at the old world's end, we see the Lich in that light as both product and warning. He is what was left behind when humanity treated the future as a resource to burn. He is also a pointer toward the work that remains, which is the long, patient task of repairing what was broken. In Oo, this work is done by scientists who bake, by musicians who remember, by friends who forgive each other after difficult days. The Lich provides the boundary, the line that says this far and no farther, and the living answer him by stepping closer together. From the void-like silence of the Lich, we turn to villains whose darkness is not born purely from destruction, but from loneliness. These are the tyrants who wear crowns and powers not simply to conquer, but to mask the hollowness within them. Their cruelty and strangeness often seem loud, yet beneath each display there is quiet isolation. In the world of O, loneliness itself can shape villains as powerfully as war. The first of these lonely figures is Ice King. When we see him for the first time, he seems foolish, a bumbling old wizard obsessed with kidnapping princesses. His antics make him easy to laugh at, but as we drift deeper into his story, the laughter softens. Behind the crown and the long beard lives Simon Petrikov, a man who once wandered the ruins of the old world with books and curiosity in his arm. He was a scholar, a collector of strange artifacts, trying to preserve the remnants of human history in a world slipping away. It was during this search that he found the crown, an object older than U itself. At first, it seemed like a treasure, a curio with whispers of magic. But when Simon placed it upon his head, the world shifted forever. He gained immense ice powers, yet with every use, the crown stole fragments of his mind. He began to forget name, faces, even the warmth of those he loved. His fiancée, Betty, watched helplessly as the man she adored dissolved into madness. The tragedy of Ice King's villainy is that it is not chosen. His story is not one of ambition or hunger for power, but of a mind eroded by enchantment. The crown cursed him to rule over loneliness. It gave him vast abilities to control frost and snow, but it stripped away the memory that gave him connection. His kidnappings and ramblings are not signs of pure evil, but echoes of a man who can no longer understand how to love or be loved. Each princess he seizes is a misguided attempt to fill the void where Betty's memory once lived. This makes Ice King one of the most sympathetic villains in Adventure Time. Beneath his bizarre actions lies the sorrow of a man who remembers dimly that he once was cherished. His tyranny is almost accidental, shaped by magic rather than will. Yet to those who encounter him, he remains dangerous. Cold winds rise at his command, and his fortress of ice looms as a monument to isolation. Still, when the snow settles, we see the lonely man behind the madness, sitting among his penguins, playing songs that only half make sense. If Ice King shows how tragedy can turn a kind man into a tyrant, Hunson Abadeer shows how a natural force of evil can still carry the weight of family. Hunson is the Lord of Evil, a figure older than kingdom, dwelling in the Nightosphere where chaos and torment reign. His powers are vast, his hunger for souls insatiable. To mortals he is terror itself, a ruler of nightmares who seems untouchable. Yet for all his grandeur, Hunson is also a father, and that small detail reshapes the way we see. To Marceline, Hunson is not only the Lord of Evil, he is her parent, the one who raised her in the aftermath of the mushroom. He did not always feed her love in the way she needed. Sometimes his affection came in the form of carelessness or neglect, or a focus on his own hunger. But still he was there. The complexity of Hunson's villainy is that it is not absolute. He can be cruel and dismissive, yet we see glimpses of genuine pride and fondness for Marceline. His villainy is tied to his nature, but his nature is complicated by family ties. The Nightosphere reflects Hunson's character. It is chaotic, dangerous, filled with swirling shapes and distorted landscape. To dwell there is to exist in a place where selfishness rules. And yet even in that dimension of corruption, Marceline grew strong, clever, and independent. Hunson's failings as a father became part of what made her resilient. In this way, his villainy is not without unintended gifts. The same traits that make him terrifying to others gave Marceline the fire to survive, and the edge to carve her own path. Unlike Ice King, who suffers from a curse he cannot escape, Hunson seems almost comfortable in his villainy. He accepts his role as the Lord of Evil, rarely questioning whether it could be different. Yet when faced with Marceline, we see cracks in his certainty. He tries clumsily to show care. He awkwardly praises her music. He even makes sacrifices for her in moments when her well-being matters more than his dominion. Hunson's story reminds us that even the darkest tyrant can carry threads of love, tangled though they may be. And then we come to Magic Man, the third of these lonely tyrants, whose villainy is perhaps the most bitter. At first glance, he is simply cruel for amusement, using his incredible magical abilities to torment whoever he meets. He transforms Finn into a giant foot, curses travelers with humiliations, and laughs at suffering as though it were a stage show meant only for him. His actions seem thoughtless, the work of a trickster with too much power. But when we look into his past, we find a wound deeper than mockery. Magic Man was once Margol's beloved, a Martian magician whose heart was whole and tender. But when Margol's was taken from him by a cosmic being, his grief curdled into rage and despair. Stripped of his love, he chose to wear cruelty as armor. His pranks and tortures are not random. They are the echoes of a heart that has lost its anchor. He lashes out at the world because the world took everything from him. This makes his villainy especially haunting. Unlike the Lich, who was born of destruction, or Hunson, who embodies his realm, Magic Man's darkness is chosen as a way to cope with unbearable loss. He is powerful enough to do great good, yet he chooses to scatter misery instead. His loneliness is sharper than Ice King's confusion or Hunson's selfishness, because it was born from love that was real and then stolen away. Magic Man's cruelty always carries a strange edge of performance. He doesn't simply harm, he crafts situations that humiliate or confuse. It's as though he wants the world to feel the same disorientation that struck him when Margol's was torn away. He turns people into objects, changes their shapes, or twists their lives into mockeries of what they were before. To him, suffering is not merely pain, it is spectacle. Each act becomes a distorted echo of the day he lost the one he loved. The universe hurt him in a way that seems senseless, so he returns that senselessness again and again. And yet the deeper truth is that Magic Man is not satisfied by any of this. No prank fills the void. No clever cruelty softens the ache in his chest. He remains a prisoner of his grief, hiding behind laughter that rings hollow when the noise dies down. His villainy is a mask as much as it is a weapon. The cruelty keeps others distant, but it also shields him from having to admit that he is still broken. He dresses his loneliness in jokes and disguises it as power, but the mask slips whenever silence stretches too long. It is telling that when his story reaches its sharpest turn, Magic Man loses even his name. His powers are stripped from him, his arrogance reduced to nothing, and he is forced to wander as normal man. In this fall from grace, we see the clearest reflection of what his villainy was always built upon. He is not cruel because he is evil in essence. He is cruel because he is empty. As normal man, he must confront that emptiness without the shield of magic. He must face the grief directly, with no tricks to soften it. This fall gives us a perspective that Ice King and Hunson never quite face. Ice King loses his identity against his will, forgetting until he is no longer himself. Hunson remains steady in his role, rarely questioning whether he could ever be different. Magic Man, however, is forced to step outside his villainy. He is asked by fate to live without it, to rebuild without the power that once let him torment others. And in that space, he begins to change. Normal man learns humility, learns to apologize, learns to connect again in small, faltering steps. It is perhaps the most hopeful transformation of any Adventure Time villain, showing that loneliness does not always have to rule a life forever. Placing Ice King, Hunson, Abadeer, and Magic Man side by side, we notice how each villain's story bends around the same theme. Loneliness is the soil in which their darker sides grow, but each expresses that loneliness in a different form. For Ice King, it is confusion, a scattered heart endlessly searching for love in the wrong places. For Hunson, it is arrogance, masking the awkward truth that even lords of evil cannot escape the bonds of family. And for Magic Man, it is bitterness, a heart once tender that now covers itself in cruelty to avoid feeling pain again. What unites them is not their power, but their distance from others. They are tyrants, not because they rule with vast armies, but because they are trapped within their own wall. Ice King builds his fortress of ice, isolated from those who might have understood him. Hunson cloaks himself in the Nightosphere, an entire realm designed to echo his selfish hunger. Magic Man drifts above making the world his playground while never truly stepping close enough to belong. Their villainy is an echo of their solitude. And yet in each of these stories, Adventure Time reminds us that the wall is not unbreakable. Ice King still holds fragments of Simon, and those fragments are enough for Marceline to reach him in rare moments of clarity. Hunson, though wrapped in shadows, cannot entirely deny his pride in his daughter's strength. And Magic Man, when stripped of his illusion, shows that even bitterness can yield to humility if given time. None of them are healed completely, but none of them are beyond the reach of connection. This makes the Lonely Tyrants some of the most emotionally layered villains in the series. Their backstories are not simply about gaining power or spreading evil. They are about losing something vital, memory, love, belonging, and struggling clumsily and painfully to replace it. Their cruelty is the shape of their wound. Their tyranny is the sound of their grief. And in that, they become mirrors for anyone who has ever felt abandoned, forgotten, or unloved. The tragedy of Simon Petrikov, who could not stop wearing the crown. The shadow of Hunson, who could not learn how to nurture without consuming. The grief of Magic Man, who could not accept the absence of Margles. Each tale carries not only darkness, but also an invitation. To look at these figures is to ask, what becomes of us when loneliness sits too long at the center of our lives? And just as we reflect on that, the world of begins to answer. It does not give simple resolution. Instead, it places friends, music, forgiveness, and second chances in their path. Adventure Time knows that loneliness is never solved by a single moment. It is softened slowly by connection, returning in unexpected ways. Loneliness in does not always look the same, yet it leaves familiar traces. When Ice King wanders his empty halls, humming tunes that fall apart halfway through, we hear loneliness in the pauses between notes. His penguins cheer him on, but they cannot replace the warmth of Betty's embrace. When Hunson Abadeer lounges in his throne, gnawing on the essence of some unfortunate soul, the room feels strangely hollow. Even surrounded by chaos, he is isolated, because no true bond can grow in a place built entirely on hunger. And when Magic Man laughs at a cruel prank, his voice echoes across the sky like a hollow shell, sharp and loud, but empty once the sound fades. Adventure Time quietly tells us that tyranny often grows from these empty places. Ice King kidnaps Princess, not because he enjoys hurting them, but because he dimly remembers what it meant to have someone by his side. Hunson rules the Nightosphere with cruel authority because he has confused domination with connection, mistaking control for care. Magic Man torments strangers because it is easier to make others feel small than to admit how small and broken he feels himself. Their actions are cruel, yes, but their roots lie in a desperate wish to be less alone. Consider Ice King again, sitting with Marceline in moments where his true self, Simon, flickers through. In those fragile minutes, we see that his soul is still capable of love, even after centuries of being eroded by the crown. He hums an old tune they once shared. He calls her Marcy with a tone that suggests he remembers more than he should. The villain fades, and the lonely man steps forward. His tyranny collapses into tenderness. It never lasts long, but the glimpse is enough. It tells us that even the most broken villains carry pieces of what they once were. Hunson's story reveals another shade of the same truth. When Marceline confronts him, challenging his careless fatherhood, he is awkward, even defensive. He boasts about his powers, shifts the subject, tries to play the part of the intimidating lord. But beneath it, there is the unmistakable ache of a parent who knows he failed. He tries, in his own distorted way, to be proud of her music. He tries to act like he understands her rebellion. These clumsy gestures show us that even the Lord of Evil is not immune to the pull of family. His villainy is absolute in the Nightosphere, but it stumbles when faced with his daughter's gaze. And Magic Man. His cruelty almost seems playful until you look closely at his eyes. When he twists Fern to a giant foot, when he reduces lives to jokes, he smirks. But behind it lies something heavier, In one rare moment, when he remembers Margle, the mask slips. His voice grows quieter, his words less sharp. The bitterness in his heart surfaces raw and exposed. We realize that his cruelty is not random at all. It is grief wearing a clown's face. He breaks others because he is broken. These portraits together form a tapestry of tyrants who are more human than they first appear. Unlike the Lich, whose essence is pure negation, these villains remind us that evil can be an expression of wounded love. Their villainy is tangled with longing. Ice King longs for a love he cannot remember fully. Hunson longs to be respected as both lord and father. Magic Man longs for the impossible return of his beloved. Each longing twists into something darker because it is never answered in the way they want. And yet, who is a world where small kindness echo loudly? Marceline's patience with Ice King allows Seaman's name to surface again and again, keeping his memory alive. Her songs, filled with fragments of their shared past, give him moments of clarity. For Hunson, it is Marceline's strength and refusal to bend that forces him to face himself. She reminds him that love is not measured by power but by presence. And for Magic Man, it is the humbling transformation into normal man that breaks the cycle. Stripped of his magic, he cannot hide behind cruelty. He must walk among others without armor, and in doing so, he rediscovers what it means to belong. Adventure Time never redeems these villains in the simple way of fairy tale. Ice King never fully becomes Simon again. Hunson never transforms into a gentle parent. Magic Man does not erase the harm he caused. Instead, the show allows them to remain flawed, complicated, and unresolved. Their villainy and their loneliness remain intertwined. But by showing us their backstories, their cracks, and their fleeting glimpses of love, the story makes them more than monsters. It makes them mirrors for our own fears of isolation. This is why the lonely tyrants linger with us long after their episodes end. We do not only remember Ice King's comical kidnapping, but also his tender songs with Marceline. We do not only recall Hunson's terrifying power, but also his awkward attempts to connect with his daughter. We do not only think of Magic Man's cruel pranks, but of the grief that drove him to mask his pain. Their backstories remind us that villainy is rarely born in a vacuum. It grows in the spaces where connection has been lost, where love has been twisted or stolen, where loneliness becomes louder than kindness. And in Ooh, these spaces are never completely abandoned. Friends return. Music lingers. Forgiveness glimmers faintly even in the darkest room. The lonely tyrants may rule with ice, with shadow, or with cruel magic. But beneath it all, their hearts beat with the same fragile rhythm as anyone else's. It is this fragility that makes their stories so haunting and so strangely comforting to explore as we drift deeper into the lore of Adventure Time. When we look closely at the lonely tyrants, we begin to see that their stories are not only about themselves, but about the people who orbit them. Ice King becomes more than a foolish villain when seen through Marceline's eyes. She remembers the man who once sheltered her as a child before the crown carved his mind into shards. To her, his rambling songs are not nonsense, but fragments of lullabies, echoes of the Simon who still flickers inside. The audience is invited to share that perspective, to see that beneath the layers of ice, a lonely man still calls out for warmth. His villainy, then, is softened. It becomes less a choice of cruelty and more the tragic inertia of a curse. Hunson Abadeer's story is likewise defined not only by his own action, but by Marceline's responses. She refuses to let him define her, even as she bears the scars of his neglect. Her independence is sharpened by his failing, her music richer because of the complex emotions he stirred. In their clashes, we hear the sound of a daughter who will not be consumed and a father who does not quite know how to love. The Nightosphere trembles under his command, yet Hunson falters when confronted by the simple truths of family. His villainy is revealed as brittle, unable to stand firm against Marceline's determination to be seen and heard. Magic Man, too, cannot be understood without considering those he torments. Finn and Jake, so often the victims of his strange tricks, see through the surface of his cruelty. They treat him not with admiration, but with the blunt honesty of friends who are unwilling to indulge his act. In one of his quieter moments, when the memory of Margles rises, even Finn, the eternal optimist, does not laugh. He listens. He sees the loneliness that Magic Man is trying so desperately to bury beneath jokes. It is this refusal to dismiss him as merely evil that creates space for his eventual transformation. When he becomes normal man, the world gives him the chance to rebuild relationships honestly, without the mask of constant cruelty. These connections remind us that villains in Adventure Time are rarely isolated myths. They are woven into the lives of others, and those bonds complicate the way we judge them. Ice King kidnaps princesses, but he is also a broken guardian, remembered and cherished by Marceline. Hunson Abadeer feasts on souls, but he is also the father of one of Ooh's greatest survivors. Magic Man delights in pranks that bring misery, but he is also a grieving lover whose pain is recognized by those who suffer his tricks. Their backstories show that even in tyranny, threads of love and loss continue to tie them to the world. This is part of what makes the lonely tyrants such haunting figures. They cannot be dismissed as purely wicked, nor can they be fully redeemed. They live in the in-between, in that fragile space where pain and power mingle. Their loneliness is a scar that no magic can heal entirely, yet their lives are dotted with moments of connection that keep them from sinking into absolute void. They are tragic, not in the sense that their stories end in death, but in the way they remain forever suspended between cruelty and vulnerability. Adventure Time often asks us to hold these contradictions gently, to look at Ice King and see both the terror of a wizard hurling ice storm and the sorrow of a man writing in a diary he cannot quite finish. To see Hunson as both the Lord of Evil and the awkward father who buys a shirt to impress his daughter. To see Magic Man as both a tormentor of heroes and a widower who has never found a way to heal. In these contradictions lies the true weight of their villainy. It is not simply about what they do to others, but about what they cannot escape within themselves. And so the meditation at the heart of their backstories is a quiet one. What does loneliness make of us? How do we carry grief, neglect, or isolation when they press upon us for years, even centuries? The lonely tyrants show us that without connection, power twists into tyranny. Ice magic becomes a prison. Authority over souls becomes neglect. Cosmic abilities turn into tools of mockery. Their villainy is loneliness given shape, a warning of what happens when sorrow is left unshared for too long. Yet there is also hope. Each of these villains is touched by relationships that do not entirely let them go. Marceline sings Simon's name into the present, refusing to let the crown erase him fully. She defies Hunson's neglect by carving her own identity, forcing him to see her strength whether he wishes to or not. Finn and Jake, by standing firm against Magic Man's cruelty, force him to face the emptiness behind his jokes. Through these connections, the lonely tyrants are not saved, but they are softened. They are given moments of humanity that prevent them from vanishing completely into darkness. As we settle with these stories, it becomes clear that villainy in Ooh is rarely about simple good or evil. It is about the fragile ways people cope with pain, the walls they build to survive, and the cracks that appear when love or memory shines through. Ice King, Hunson Abadeer, and Magic Man are tyrants, yes, but they are also testaments to how loneliness can twist even the strongest hearts. Their backstories remind us that power without connection is hollow, and that even in the strangest corners of love continues to reach out, sometimes clumsy, sometimes faint, but always persistent. When we move away from the Lich's void and the lonely tyrant shaped by grief, we arrive at another kind of villainy, one born not from curse or isolation, but from imbalance. In the land of Ooh, elements are not merely background forces. They are living patterns woven into people, places, and entire kingdom. Fire, ice, slime, and candy each hold their place, and when harmony is respected, life finds a rhythm. But when these elements swell too large or burn too fiercely, they create rulers whose power is more prison than gift. These are the elemental opposition, villains who embody extremes of nature. The first and most vivid of these figures is Flame King. To many, he appears as the fiery mirror of Ice King, ruling over his domain with the same mix of authority and madness, but forged in heat instead of frost. His body burns with constant flame, his crown heavy with sparks that never fade. He is a father, a king, and a manipulator, shaping his daughter Flame Princess into a pawn in his scheme. Yet behind his fire lies a philosophy, that destruction is strength and compassion's weakness. His villainy is not the randomness of the Lich, nor the loneliness of Simon, but the cold logic of flame pushed to its harshest truth. Flame King views his daughter not as a child to nurture, but as a weapon to wield. He believes that fire is meant to conquer, that kingdoms exist to be burned and remade in Flame's image. When she begins to show emotions that contradict his rule, emotions of compassion, curiosity, and even love, he sees them not as growth, but as betrayal. His backstory is less about loss and more about inheritance. He carries the traditions of flame, the old belief that heat exists to consume. His cruelty is not simply personal, it is cultural, a lineage of fire passed down until it becomes unquestioned law. This makes Flame Princess's journey especially moving. Her rebellion against her father is not only the rebellion of a child against a parent, it is the rebellion of warmth against fire's tyranny, the emergence of balance within imbalance. Flame King's villainy lies in his refusal to see flame as anything but destructive. In his mind, his daughter is dangerous when she loves, because love softens the edge of fire. But in reality, love allows her to channel her element without losing her. The contrast between father and daughter shows us two possibilities of fire, one locked in endless cycles of destruction, and one capable of growth and transformation. Alongside Flame King, the world of Ooh holds other elemental creatures whose villainy is tied to imbalance. The fire wolves, for instance, roam as living symbols of uncontrolled flame. They are not rulers like Flame King, but they embody the same principle. Fire without harmony devours everything in its path. Their glowing eyes and flickering forms remind us that when nature tips too far into one element, danger follows. They are wild, untamed, and merciless, not because they have chosen cruelty, but because their existence is bound to imbalance. It is in these elemental villains that Adventure Time shows us how power, when unchecked, can become monstrous. Ice can preserve and protect, but in excess, it isolates and freezes life away. Fire can warm and renew, but in excess, it consumes until nothing remains. Candy can comfort and delight, but in excess, it traps and infantilizes. Slime can adapt and flow, but in excess, it dissolves identity itself. The villains tied to elements are not strangers from outside Ooh. They are Ooh's own nature, grown out of balance, teaching us through their tyranny what happens when a single force dominates the rest. Flame King, in particular, represents how imbalance within family becomes its own form of villainy. His attempt to suppress his daughter's growth is not only a political act, but a deeply personal wound. He cannot imagine a flame that does not burn, and so he cannot imagine a child who does not obey his image. His villainy is stubbornness, given the strength of fire, a refusal to change even as the world around him moves forward. This refusal is what isolates him, leaving him not only feared, but ultimately overthrown by the very flame he tried to control. The fire wolves echo this same stubbornness in animal form. They are predators of flame, incapable of compromise, their howls burning through the night like warnings of imbalance made flesh. To meet them is to meet the wild side of fire, the part that does not listen or negotiate. Their villainy, if it can be called that, is not malice but inevitability. They remind us that nature, when tipped too far, becomes hostile, even without intention. Together, Flame King and the Fire Wolves form a portrait of what happens when fire forgets its other side. Fire can be hearth and home, the glow that gathers people together. But in their hands or in their howls, it becomes nothing but a weapon. Their backstories are not stories of grief or loss, but of misused inheritance. They inherit power and they inherit tradition, and they carry it without question until it hardens into tyranny. In this way, the elemental oppositions are perhaps the most universal villains of all. They remind us that imbalance is always waiting, not just in rulers and monsters, but in ourselves. Too much coldness, too much heat, too much sweetness, too much fluidity, each can isolate, each can consume. The villains of the elements are Oo's warning that every gift, if clutched too tightly, can become a prison. The elements of Oo are not merely colors on the map. They are deep, ancient rhythms that shape entire civilization. And just as the Fire Kingdom burns with constant heat, so too do other domains reveal what happens when balance tilts too far in one direction. To understand Flame King fully, we must also look outward at his counterpart, rulers of slime, candy, and even ice, who each reveal the dangers of power when it becomes obsession. The Slime Queen, for instance, is not as immediately terrifying as the Fire Wolves or Flame King. Her body shifts and bends, her laughter stretches like her form, and her kingdom oozes with playful strangeness. But beneath the surface lies a subtler kind of villainy. In the Slime Kingdom, individuality melts away. Citizens become interchangeable, flowing into one another until it is difficult to tell where one ends and another begins. The Queen thrives in this chaos, ruling not by sharp commands, but by the slow erosion of self. In her hands, slime ceases to be a playful force and becomes a solvent for identity. Her villainy is not destruction through fire, but dissolution through endless blending. Then there is candy, an element that at first seems the gentlest of all. Peppermint sticks and sugar walls, gumdrop guards, and frosting-topped castle. What could possibly be dangerous in such sweetness? Yet Princess Bubblegum herself demonstrates the shadow side of candy. In her need to protect and preserve her kingdom, she becomes rigid, controlling, unwilling to let her people grow beyond her design. Candy, when imbalanced, is not harmless delight, but suffocating order. It is the slow crystallization of freedom into sugar cages. Though Bubblegum is not always cast as a villain, her moments of cold calculation remind us that even candy, if left unchecked, can dominate with sticky permanence. Flame King's tyranny finds its reflection here, where he forces fire to mean destruction. Bubblegum at times forces candy to mean obedience. Both show how an element can twist from gift to prison, and yet the difference lies in intent. Bubblegum struggles toward balance, often pulled back by love for her people. Flame King resists balance entirely, seeing it as weakness. This contrast teaches us that villainy among the elements is not only about power itself, but about the refusal to question it. Beyond these rulers, we find scattered creatures and kingdoms that embody elemental extreme. The Ice Kingdom, long shaped by the crown's corruption, freezes into a monument of isolation. The Fire Wolves, as we have seen, embody flame without reason. Even the elemental catastrophes that sometimes ripple through blizzards without end, firestorms that leap from mountain to mountain, waves of slime that consume valleys, feel like warnings that nature itself rebels when one force is allowed to dominate. These are not villains in the human sense, but they carry the same lesson. Imbalance is dangerous. What makes the elemental oppositions so compelling is how they blur the line between natural disaster and villainous intent. Flame King chooses tyranny, shaping fire into a weapon. The Slime Queen delights in chaos, letting identity dissolve around her. But the Fire Wolves and the elemental storms are not choosing at all. They are inevitability, forces of nature given form. In placing them side by side, Adventure Time asks us to consider how much of villainy is choice and how much is the natural consequence of imbalance left unattended. This theme runs deeper than kingdom. It speaks to Oo itself, a land born from the ruins of imbalance, the Mushroom War, where humanity's fire consumed the world beyond recognition. The Lich rose from that imbalance. Pure destruction had given shape. The lonely tyrants we explored earlier are echoes of grief and solitude left to fester. And now, the elemental opposition show us that even the world's foundation is precarious. The elements are blessings, but if held too tightly, they fracture into curses. Flame King becomes the cautionary tale most clearly linked to family. His refusal to see his daughter as more than a tool is an imbalance of love, just as much as it is an imbalance of fire. In his story, Adventure Time warns not only of kingdoms consumed by flames, but of hearts consumed by control. His downfall is not only political, but personal. When Flame Princess rises against him, she proves that balance is possible, that fire can express not just destruction, but passion, creativity, and justice. Her existence is a quiet rebuke to her father's legacy, showing that no element is doomed to tyranny forever. The fire wolves remain as shadows of what happened when fire is not tamed by love. They are the reminders of what Flame Princess could become if she followed her father's path without question. Their glowing bodies are warnings of imbalance unchecked, their howls carried on winds that speak of flame consuming itself. They show us that even when rulers fall, the danger of imbalance remains alive in the land. Nature itself remembers. And so in these stories, the elemental oppositions reveal themselves as villains, not because they are strange or monstrous, but because they are mirrors. They reflect the dangers of letting one force rule over all others, whether it is fire over love, slime over identity, candy over freedom, or ice over warmth. Their backstories are the histories of imbalance written across O's landscapes, each one a lesson whispered in the crackle of fire or the drip of slime. The story of the elements deepens when we turn to the four primordials themselves: fire, ice, slime, and candy. These forces existed long before the kingdoms we know, long before Finn or Jake ever set foot on their adventures. They are not just cultural inheritances or family legacy. They are cosmic currents, woven into the very beginning of Oo's rebirth after the Mushroom War. And when the balance between them falters, villainy grows like cracks in glass. Among them, Patient St. Pim, the elemental of ice, holds a special place in the tale of imbalance. Unlike Simon, whose crown warped his mind, Patience embodies ice itself: stillness, preservation, cold clarity. Yet her flaw is the same as all the elemental opposition. She clings too tightly to her nature. When she awakens from her frozen slumber in a world that has moved on without her, she does not seek harmony with the other elements. Instead, she schemes to restore the elemental order by force, believing that her vision of balance is the only truth. Patience's villainy is not fire's open destruction, but something slower. She freezes progress in place, demanding that the world return to a pattern that no longer fits. In this way, she is both tyrant and relic, unable to accept that life has grown beyond the ancient shapes. Her story tells us that even the pursuit of balance, if demanded without compassion, becomes its own form of tyranny. She looks upon the other elemental, cactus, slime, candy, fire, and does not see partners but chess pieces in her frozen plan. The danger of Patience lies not in her ice blast or her frosty powers, but in her refusal to see the present as alive, messy, and worthy of care. The candy elemental, represented by Princess Bubblegum herself, complicates the picture further. Unlike Patience or Flame King, Bubblegum strives toward care. She builds, she protects, she nurtures. Yet even she falters when Candy's nature becomes too dominant. Her kingdom is orderly, sometimes suffocating. Her citizens are loyal, but sometimes too dependent. When candy overflows, it does not destroy with fire or erase with slime. It traps in sweetness, creating a world where safety hardens into control. Bubblegum's darker moments, the ones where she manipulates or refuses to let go, remind us that imbalance does not always wear the mask of cruelty. Sometimes it wears the mask of protection. Slime's nature is different again. The Slime Queen thrives in chaos, delighting in the loss of boundary. In her story, we see how imbalance dissolves identity, turning individuals into a mass where no one voice can be heard. Her villainy is laughter without regard for consequence, the glee of watching everything blend together until nothing unique remains. In contrast to Bubblegum's rigid order, Slime's danger is its refusal to allow structure at all. Too much freedom becomes indistinguishable from dissolution, and in her kingdom, everything is always slipping away. The fire elemental, whose legacy is carried by Flame Princess, embodies the purest form of conflict. Fire renews by burning away what is old, but when it is unchecked, it does not know where to stop. Flame King believed that fire was destined only to conquer. His villainy, then, is not simply personal cruelty, but a reflection of fire without restraint. Flame Princess's rebellion again becomes one of the most hopeful arcs in the elemental saga. By choosing compassion and justice, she proves that an element does not have to be imprisoned by its extremes. Her very existence rebukes the idea that nature is destiny. What these elementals share is not malice, but imbalance. Patience as ice holds too long. Bubblegum's candy orders too tightly. Slime's laughter dissolves too completely. Fire King's heat consumes too quickly. Each villain reveals what happens when one truth of nature denies the other. Ice without warmth is eternal stagnation. Fire without compassion is endless destruction. Candy without freedom is smothering. Slime without structure is oblivion. Adventure Time places these forces side by side not only to build conflict, but to whisper a lesson that balance is fragile and imbalance is villainy. When an element forgets its companion, it grows monstrous. Flame King becomes a tyrant. The Slime Queen becomes a dissolver of cell. Patience, St. Pym, becomes a frozen relic, dragging the world backward. Even Bubblegum, in her worst moments, becomes a queen who rules too tightly, her love twisted into manipulation. The elemental oppositions are not villains in the same sense as the Lich, who embodies void, or Magic Man, who embodies grief. They are villains in the sense that they forget harmony. Their backstories are the histories of nature's gifts turned against themselves. Each one is a warning of what happens when any single force grows too absolute, whether it be fire in the home, sweetness in the heart, or ice in the mind. And yet, as always in Ooh, there is hope woven into the story. Flame Princess proves that fire can be passion, not just destruction. Bubblegum, though flawed, shows that candy can nurture, not only control. Even Patience, in her failure, reminds us that ice is not evil in itself. It is simply part of a whole that must be balanced. The villainy of the elemental oppositions is real, but so is the possibility of harmony. Their stories remind us that no element is doomed forever. Each can be guided back into balance if compassion and understanding are allowed to lead the way. Balance in Ooh is not a fixed pattern. It is a breathing arrangement that depends on choice. That is why elemental villainy always feels close to redemption. A ruler can step back from extremity, and the landscape softens with them. When Flame Princess chooses justice over conquest, the Fire Kingdom's light changes. Torches still burn, but the blaze feels purposeful rather than hungry. When Bubblegum loosens her grip, the Candy Kingdom hums with a gentler order. When slime is guided by boundaries chosen rather than imposed, its playfulness becomes community rather than chaos. Even ice can turn from prison into quiet clarity when it serves memory rather than control. Small scenes show this truth better than grand battle. A smith in the Fire Kingdom tempers metal with water and waits for the right color before forging. A candy citizen learns a new skill without asking the princess for permission and returns home proud and a little surprised. A slime child holds a shape longer than before and laughs at the simple victory of being able to choose. A quiet day in the Ice Kingdom passes without storms, the sky thin and blue, the air helpful rather than harsh. None of these moments shout, yet together they sketch a map of harmony returning. The fire wolves remain a reminder that nature will always test that harmony. They prowl the borders and search for kindling. Their presence is a lesson that balance must be maintained, not declared once and forgotten. Rangers learn to read their tracks and steer them toward lava fields where they can roam without turning forests into ash. The wolves do not change their nature, but the world around them grows wiser. In this way, even the most relentless force can be held within a pattern that protects life. Patience. St. Pym's failure continues to instruct long after her plans collapse. She shows that even the pursuit of an ancient order can become harmful if it ignores living hearts. Her frozen vision tried to place people in perfect shapes, But life prefers imperfect rhythms that allow growth. The wisdom she refuses is simple. True balance, listen. It leaves room for today to be different from yesterday. It accepts that fire needs friendship, candy needs freedom, slime needs purpose, and ice needs kindness. Finn and Jake move through these realms like needles stitching cloth. They do not fix the elements by defeating them in a single contest. They visit, listen, and nudge. Finn believes that people can be better than their worst habits, and that belief works like a key on elemental locks. Jake trusts the mood of a room, and that trust often prevents a spark from becoming a blaze. Princess Bubblegum learns slowly and sometimes painfully that protecting others includes trusting them to protect themselves. Flame Princess learns that anger can be a compass if it points toward justice rather than domination. Even the Slime Queen, in rare lucid pauses, notices that laughter is warmer when it comes from consent rather than confusion. The history of the elements also shapes how Ooh remembers the Mushroom War. The world broke under one overwhelming force, then rebuilt itself with four. That rebuilding was never meant to crown a single element forever. It was meant to distribute the burden of keeping life alive. Villainy emerges when one steward mistakes their stewardship for destiny. Flame King believed he owned the future because he could burn it. Patience believed she owned balance because she could freeze it. The lesson that remains is quiet and steady. Power is borrowed. It is returned in better condition when it knows its neighbor. There are rituals that help. Festivals that honor all four elements at once. Forges that invite ice water as well as flame. Kitchens that ask for spice and sweetness and a pinch of salt. Schools that teach a slime child to pause before joining a group, and a candy child to take a risk and scuff their knees. These small practices are how a land is not to tilt. They look ordinary, yet they keep kings from hardening into tyrants and keep storms from gathering without anyone noticing. In the stories told by elders, the elements are described as friends who sit at a round table. Fire speaks first because it cannot help it, then promises to listen. Candy writes notes so that agreements are remembered. Slime moves chairs so that everyone can see. Ice pours water and keeps time by the quiet tick of cooling stone. When one friend stops showing up, the table leans. When one friend speaks for all, the table becomes a stage and the meeting becomes a lecture. Villainy is simply the meeting that forgot to be a meeting. Flame, King's final image in this segment, is not his throne, but his reflection in his daughter's eyes. He wanted a weapon and found a ruler who would not inherit his prison. The fire wolves fade into a ridgeline, tails bright. The patrols folded into the vigilance of those who know that wildness is part of the world. The Slime Queen's laughter is heard at a festival where she agrees to rules she helped write, which makes the laughter sound different. Princess Bubblegum stands on a balcony and sends a request rather than an order. Somewhere in a high valley, a sheet of ice releases a perfect bell tone and a traveler smiles without knowing why. When we step back, the elemental oppositions reveal a map of moral weather. Too much of any one climate and travelers suffer. A good guide learns to read the air and adjust. That is the work of rulers and friends and neighbors. It is also the work asked of anyone who listens to these tales at the edge of sleep. The elements live in us as well. There are days when fire wants to answer every question, when candy wants to keep everything the same, when slime wants to drift and forget the plan, when ice wants to close the window and be still. The question is not which element to banish, but how to invite each one to the table and ask for its best. This is why the elemental villains matter. They are warnings carved into the season. They show what happens when one voice decides it is the only voice that counts. They also show that correction is possible. A kingdom can cool without going cold. A ruler can soften without losing strength. A wild pack can be guided without being broken. A century can remember the promise it made to the next century and keep it. With that understanding, the fires bank, the frost clears, the syrup thickens but does not harden. The rivers run clear after rain. Ooh sleeps easier when balance is tended like a garden rather than enforced like a wall. The villains of the elements do not vanish. They remain as edges that keep the picture sharp. Yet their edges no longer cut. They frame a land that has learned how to breathe in rhythm itself. Hold that quiet rhythm for a moment. The next roads lead us from elemental thrones into older quarrels and secret shapes. Beyond balanced hearths and thawed fields waits a gallery of schemes and shadows, of uncles and emperors, of cosmic masks hiding in small bodies. The night is deep enough to carry another chapter, and our lantern still burns with a patient light. As we step away from the elemental rulers and their fragile balances, our path through ooze villainy darkens into stranger places. Not every tyrant rules from a throne. Some lurk in the corners of history, waiting for their moment to emerge. Some wear disguises so convincing that the world mistakes them for harmless until it is too late. Others dwell in forests where hunger takes on a voice, weaving snares out of bark and shadow. These are the monsters and the shadows of figures whose villainy is often tangled with family, memory, and ancient secret. The first of these is Gumbald, a figure whose story reshapes the very foundation of the Candy Kingdom. When we think of Princess Bubblegum, we often see her as the unquestioned architect of her sugary domain. She is the founder, the caretaker, the one who carved life out of candy and gave it order. Yet behind her sits a darker history, one that begins with her uncle. Gumbald was not merely a bystander in the kingdom's creation. He was one of its earliest builders, and in those days his hands shaped more than stone and sugar. They shaped betrayal. In the beginning, Gumbald stood beside Bubblegum, helping her mold the candy. The kingdom was a vision, fragile but filled with possibility. But where Bubblegum sought to nurture, Gumbald sought to dominate. He looked at the citizens not as children to be protected, but as tools to be wielded. His ambitions stretched beyond the walls of their sweet kingdom, reaching outward into dreams of empire. He longed not only for respect, but for obedience. And when Bubblegum resisted his designs, refusing to turn their people into an army, his envy turned sharp. This is where his villainy truly takes root. Gumbald could not accept a kingdom that existed for joy and safety alone. He wanted power, and when his niece would not grant it, he turned his cunning against her. He created schemes, potions, and plots meant to undercut her authority. Yet the irony of his story is that Bubblegum, though young, proved the stronger. When his rebellion threatened to fracture everything she had built, she acted decisively. With her science, she reduced him and his allies into simple candy folk, erasing their ambition with the transformation that left them harmless. Here we see the shadow side of the Candy Kingdom's history. Bubblegum, in her need to protect, became ruthless. Gumbald, in his hunger for authority, became the first true enemy of her reign. Their battle was not only political, but familial. It was an uncle and a niece locked in a struggle over what their people should be. Gumbald's backstory reminds us that villainy in is often born at the dinner table, in the quiet moments where love should live but rivalry takes its place. Centuries later, Gumbald would return, restored to his original form. His bitterness had not faded. If anything, it had fermented, growing stronger in the darkness of memory. To him, Bubblegum's rule was theft, an erasure of his rightful place in history. His villainy was sharpened by the wound of being forgotten, of having his ambition rewritten as foolishness. In his mind, he was the true architect of the Candy Kingdom, robbed by a child who had stolen both power and narrative. And so when he rises again, he does so not as a mere schemer, but as a man fueled by the fire of revenge. This makes Gumbald one of Oo's most complex villains. He is not destruction incarnate like the Lich, nor loneliness embodied like Ice King. He is betrayal personified, a figure who believes himself wrong, who seeks to reclaim a legacy he feels was stolen. His cruelty lies in his inability to see beyond his bitterness. He cannot imagine a kingdom built on love, only one built on domination. Where Bubblegum evolves and learns, he calcifies. His backstory is a warning that villainy often grows strongest in the soil of resentment. And yet, his tale also casts a shadow on Bubblegum herself. In defeating him, she did not simply vanquish a villain. She rewrote him, erased him, controlled him. This raises the question that lingers quietly in the corners of who truly is the villain in such a history? Is it the uncle who betrayed his niece, or the niece who, in saving her kingdom, used science to strip away her family's will. Adventure Time does not give us a simple answer. Instead, it leaves us with a knot of questions, tangled in sugar and memory, inviting us to ponder them in the stillness of night. From the bitterness of Gumbald, we drift into the cosmic strangeness of Orgalorg, a villain who hides in plain sight. For here, the shadows of are not always family feuds or courtly betrayal. Sometimes they are ancient horrors disguised as the ordinary, and no disguise is more convincing than the waddling, squeaking form of a penguin. Orgalorg's story is one of the strangest in all of Adventure Time, because it blurs the line between comedy and cosmic terror. For countless episodes, Gunter waddles through the Ice Kingdom as Ice King's loyal penguin. Small, clumsy, and oddly endearing, Gunter feels like little more than a running joke, a servant who squawks, smashes bottles, and dreams of nothing larger than mischief. Yet behind those wide eyes lies something ancient, something older than the kingdom of older even than the Mushroom War. Long ago, Orgalorg was not a penguin at all. It was a cosmic entity, a terrible force that sought dominion over worlds. In its true form, Orgalorg was massive, tentacled, and mighty, feared across galaxies as a conqueror of life. Its hunger was not unlike the Lich's, though shaped by pride as much as by destruction. Where the Lich sought silence, Orgalorg sought supremacy. Its voice carried the cold echo of a being that saw itself as above all other life, a shadow that stretched not across a single land, but across entire star systems. Yet cosmic power is never absolute. Orgalorg's ambition caught the attention of beings even greater than itself, the cosmic entities who guard the balance of the universe. For daring to claim dominion, Orgalorg was struck down. Cast from its vast form, it fell to earth, diminished, its essence trapped in the shape of a penguin. Its memory was blurred, its grandeur erased, leaving only fragments of its former self. The waddling creature that Ice King treated as a pet was in truth the remains of an ancient tyrant. This disguise, whether by punishment or by design, is what makes Orgalorg so haunting. In comedy often hides horror, and innocence masks corruption. For years, Gunter's antics seemed harmless. He smashed glasses for no reason, scribbled little notes, and occasionally lashed out with surprising violence. Only later did we understand that these were the ripples of something deeper. Orgalorg was not gone. It was waiting. The penguin's clumsy body was a shell, but inside, the cosmic tyrant dreamed of the stars it once commanded. The reveal of Orgalorg's true nature is one of the series' quietest yet most unsettling twists. To realize that a cosmic monster lives in the Ice King's closest companion is to understand how easily carries shadows beneath its laughter. Unlike Gumbald, who wears his bitterness on his face, Orgalorg hides its ambition in the guise of loyalty. The shadow does not stalk through dark forests or ancient ruin. It waddles beside us, squeaking and smiling, until the moment it stretches out its wings and the stars themselves shudder. What is most fascinating about Orgalorg's backstory is that, even diminished, it never loses its hunger. The penguin form does not erase the tyrant's ambition. Instead, it compresses it. Within the small, silly shape beats the mind of a conqueror. This creates one of the strangest contradictions in Adventure Time, a creature that is at once adorable and terrifying. The audience laughs at Gunter's antics, but those laughs catch in the throat when we remember that this is the echo of Orgalorg, the breaker of worlds. And still, there is tragedy in his tale. Orgalorg is not simply a monster trapped in a small form. It is a being that has been punished, diminished, and forgotten. Its villainy is tangled with humiliation. To have once commanded galaxy, only to be reduced to a pet penguin, is itself a kind of torment. Its attempts to reclaim power are not only ambition, but desperation, the frantic struggle of a fallen god trying to remember its true name. This does not excuse the darkness at its core, but it gives the villainy a sorrowful shape. Adventure Time uses Orgalorg to remind us that shadows do not always loom. Sometimes they shrink, hiding in corners where no one thinks to look. Sometimes the greatest threats wear the smallest disguises. And sometimes villainy is born not from power gain, but from power lost, from the aching hunger to return to what once was. Orgalorg is as much a ghost of its former self as it is a monster, haunting its own life even as it haunts Ooh. From cosmic tyrants hidden in penguin feathers, we move next into the forests of Ooh, where another kind of shadow waits. Here the darkness is not born of galaxies or family feuds, but of hunger and magic, ancient and wild. The tree witch, with her roots tangled deep into the earth, represents yet another face of villainy, one that whispers from the woods, promising gifts that are never free. The forests of Ooh have always carried a hush to them, a sense that something listens among the branches. Unlike the kingdom, which rise in bright colors and declare themselves with banners, the woods prefer secrets. And it is here, in those hidden groves, that we encounter the tree witch, a figure whose villainy feels more intimate than cosmic tyrants or feuding royals. Where Gumbald plots empire and Orgalorg dreams of galaxy, the tree witch waits quietly for wanderers to step into her realm. Her power is not in armies or crowns, but in the temptation she weaves with roots and shadow. She is remembered most vividly through her encounter with Finn and Jake. When they cross into her domain, she offers them a trade, treasures of power in exchange for something as simple as a lock of hair. To a careless adventurer, this might seem like a bargain too good to refuse. Yet in Ooh, gifts from the shadows always carry a price. The tree witch's hunger is not for gold or jewels, but for pieces of identity. Hair in her hands is more than just strands. It is essence, memory, the root of a person's strength. In this, the tree witch echoes the oldest myths of witches and forest spirits. She does not conquer by force, but by bargain. She entices rather than compels. And this is what makes her villainy so unsettling. It is quiet, easy to miss, even easy to agree to until it is too late. Her backstory is less a series of events and more a pattern. An ancient being who has fed for generations on the naivety of travelers, who has built her power one trade at a time. Her forest is littered with remnants of those who accepted her deals without realizing the weight of what they had given up. We are never told how old she is or where she came from. She might be as ancient as the trees themselves, or perhaps she was once human, twisted by the Mushroom War's magic into something less mortal and more rooted. Her appearance, gnarled, bark-like, with hair that blends into branches, suggests that she has grown into the forest she inhabits. She does not rule it from a throne, but from within, her body as much a part of the woodland as any tree. Her villainy is not ambition, but hunger, steady and patient, like roots that spread underground until they have claimed everything above. The tree witch's tale reminds us of a different kind of shadow in Ooh. The shadows of forgotten bargain, of ancient beings who are not seen until their power has already entangled them. Unlike Gumbald, who demands recognition, or Orgalorg, who seeks restoration, the tree witch does not care if her name is remembered. She is content with her trades, her little collections, the strands of hair and pieces of identity tucked away like treasures. Her villainy, quiet, parasitic, and enduring. What makes her so fascinating is how she reflects Ooh's post-apocalyptic strangeness. In a world remade by the Mushroom War, forests themselves carry magic. The line between nature and sorcery blurs. A tree might offer fruit, or it might whisper riddles. A witch might dwell in a house of bark, or she might be the bark itself. The tree witch belongs to this in-between space, a reminder that Ooh is as dangerous in its small shadows as in its cosmic battle. Her backstory, though never fully told, lingers in suggestion. Perhaps once a woman, perhaps always a spirit, always waiting in the green dark for the next foolish soul. When we place her alongside Gumbald and Orgalorg, a pattern emerges. These are villains of the shadows, each one lurking where they can be underestimated. Gumbald hides in the footnotes of history, forgotten until he returns with vengeance. Orgalorg hides in the form of a penguin, its cosmic ambition masked by comic clumsiness. The tree witch hides in the forest, her hunger cloaked as generosity. Their villainy is not loud at first. It creeps, it waits, it disguises itself until the moment it is ready to strike. This makes them some of the most dangerous figures in Ooh. Precisely because they do not seem dangerous at all. A family feud sounds petty until it ignites into war. A waddling penguin looks harmless until the stars themselves begin to tremble. A bargain for a lock of hair seems small until it costs you your very essence. Adventure Time teaches us through these villains that shadows are rarely empty. They are full of waiting things, patient and cunning. And yet, even in their darkness, there are lessons. Gumbald reminds us that bitterness festers when left unresolved. Orgalorg teaches that fallen power often hides itself in unexpected form. The Tree Witch warns us to tread carefully with offers that seem too kind. Their backstories are warnings wrapped in stories, the kind we tell quietly at night, not to frighten, but to remember. As we close this gallery of ooze, monsters, and shadows, we see how villainy takes on many shapes. Not only the void of the Lich, not only the loneliness of Ice King, not only the imbalance of Flame King. Villainy can also be resentment disguised as legacy, cosmic ambition shrunk into a penguin's feathers, or hunger for identity hidden in the stillness of a forest. Ooze shadows are many, and each one reveals a truth about power, patience, and the costs of forgetting. From here, the story turns toward villains who are less hidden and more theatrical. Tricksters, pretenders, and creatures of betrayal whose schemes play out in courts and dungeons, their cruelty often sharper because it is personal. But for now, let us hold the quiet of the forest, the echo of cosmic wings, and the bitterness of family feuds, for they remind us how easily shadows gather in the places we least expect. The shadows of Ooh hide many monsters, but some villains prefer to step into the light, weaving their cruelty not in silence, but in deception, betrayal, and open challenge. These are the Tricksters, the Rulers, and the Warbringers, figures whose villainy thrives in manipulation, charm, or conflict. They do not wait quietly in forests or beneath disguises. They demand attention, pulling others into their games, whether they wish it or not. The first of these is Ash, a figure whose story is tightly bound to Marceline. Where many villains of Ooh reach outward to claim kingdoms or cosmic power, Ash's villainy is deeply personal. He was once Marceline's lover, a magician who cloaked his selfishness in the appearance of affection. For a time, he seemed like a companion, someone who shared her life, her music, and her days. Yet beneath the surface, Ash's care was hollow. His love was a mask that concealed control. Ash betrayed Marceline not with armies, but with a single choice. He sold Hambo, her beloved childhood toy, to a witch in exchange for magical power. To outsiders, this may appear trivial, a toy traded for strength. But to Marceline, Hambo was no ordinary object. It was a vessel of memory, a piece of her past, a reminder of the child she once was and the love she had carried through years of loneliness. By trading it away, Ash revealed the truth of his heart. Power mattered more to him than her. His villainy lies in this betrayal, the casual cruelty of treating something sacred as disposable. When Marceline discovers the truth, her anger burns as brightly as any fire kingdom blaze. Ash does not apologize, nor does he understand why she cannot forgive him. His selfishness blinds him to the depth of what he has taken. In this way, his villainy is not cosmic or grand, but intimate. It is the cruelty of someone who refuses to see the worth of another's heart. Ash becomes a villain, not because he destroys kingdom, but because he dismisses love itself as unimportant. This makes his backstory one of the most relatable forms of villainy in Adventure Time. Many of Ooh's villains are ancient beings, monsters, or kings. Ash is simply a man who failed to care. His betrayal reminds us that villainy can be as small as a selfish decision, as ordinary as failing to cherish someone who trusted you. And sometimes, those betrayals leave deeper scars than the grandest battle. From Ash's intimate cruelty, we drift into something stranger. Ricardio the Heart Guy, a villain whose very form is unsettling. Ricardio is not a wizard or a king, but the living heart of the Ice King, given shape and voice. In his appearance, we find one of the most surreal examples of Ooh's imagination. A giant, disembodied heart with sharp teeth and a gentleman's manners, Ricardio embodies both charm and menace. He speaks with elegance, but behind every word lies hunger. Unlike Ash, who betrays love by dismissing it, Ricardio twists love into something grotesque. His obsession with Princess Bubblegum is not romance, but possession. He dreams of holding her heart in his hands, literally and figuratively. His villainy is not born from loneliness, Ice King's, but from the physical embodiment of Ice King's desire, stripped of humanity and left only with hunger. Ricardio represents what happens when longing loses all restraint, when desire stops being connection and becomes consumption. What makes Ricardio so unsettling is how he cloaks this hunger in civility. He bows, he flatters, he plays the role of a suitor. Yet every gesture is laced with menace, every word with double meaning. His villainy is theatrical, performed like a play, but its core is simple and chilling. He does not want to love Princess Bubblegum. He wants to own her. This theatrical quality is what connects Ricardio to the wider theme of tricksters and pretenders. His villainy thrives on performance. He acts as though he is refined, but the mask slips easily, revealing the sharp-toothed hunger beneath. In this he mirrors Ash's false affection, though on a grander scale. Both villains remind us that betrayal often comes dressed in the clothing of love or charm. The danger lies not in the obvious monster, but in those who smile as they reach for your heart. And from these smaller, more intimate betrayals, the story of Ooh shifts again into something larger. The villains who do not trick or seduce, but who march openly into battle. For in the time before the present, Marceline herself faced the vampire court, a council of ancient undead who carried their villainy not as whispers, but as war. The vampire court is one of the most striking collections of villains in Adventure Time, because they embody not just cruelty, but permanence, where Ash betrayed Marceline in a moment of selfishness, and Ricardio twisted love into hunger. The vampires of the court turned their villainy into an identity that spanned centuries. They were not temporary foes to be defeated in a single battle. They were predators who had ruled the night for generations, and they intended to go on forever. At the heart of the court lies the Empress, a vampire who carries herself with cold elegance. Unlike the primal hunger of Ricardio or the crude selfishness of Ash, the Empress rules through seduction. She does not simply attack. She manipulates, charms, and weaves herself into the lives of others. Her backstory, though never fully shown, suggests that she has survived so long precisely because she understands how to make herself desired even as she feeds. Her villainy is the most insidious kind of predation, the kind that looks like affection until the teeth sink in. Then there is the Hierophant, who embodies the old laws of vampire society. Where the Empress thrives on allure, the Hierophant thrives on tradition. He believes in order, in hierarchy, in maintaining the ancient ways of feeding and ruling. His villainy is not impulsive, but rigid. To him, mortals exist to serve, and vampires exist to rule. He is a shadow of aristocracy, the voice of an undead order that refuses to adapt. In him, we see villainy born not from passion, but from stubbornness, the refusal to let the world grow beyond its ancient oppression. The Fool offers a different face of the same hunger. His villainy is wrapped in chaos and mockery, an endless performance of madness. Unlike the Empress or the Hierophant, the Fool thrives on confusion. He taunts and plays with his victims, treating their fear as entertainment. His laughter echoes not with joy but with cruelty. Where Ash was selfish and Ricardio possessive, the Fool delights in torment for its own sake. His backstory suggests not a fallen king or a careful manipulator, but a predator who has embraced chaos as a mask, hiding his emptiness behind painted smiles. And finally, the Moon, a figure whose quiet presence carries its own menace. She is not as flamboyant as the Empress, nor as rigid as the Hierophant, nor as chaotic as the Fool. Her villainy lies in her stillness, in her patience. She represents inevitability, the slow, steady pull of hunger that returns night after night. The Moon does not need to shout or chase. She waits, she watches, and she feeds when the time is right. In her, we see villainy as endurance, the certainty that no matter how many nights are survived, there will always be another. Together, the vampire court represents the many faces of predation, seduction, tradition, chaos, inevitability, all tied together by hunger. Their backstories stretch back into a time before Oo's present peace, when Marceline herself hunted them one by one. Each battle was not only a test of strength, but a confrontation with a different form of villainy. The Empress tested her ability to resist temptation. The Hierophant tested her ability to defy old authority. The Fool tested her patience against mockery. The Moon tested her endurance against a predator that could wait forever. Marceline's victory over them was not only the triumph of a warrior, but the shaping of her identity. By slaying the court, she declared herself not only a survivor of the Mushroom War, but a protector of those who came after. Yet the memory of these vampires lingered, their shadows carried forward into the present. They remind us that villainy in Ooh is not always loud or brief. Sometimes it is ancient, carried forward through centuries, adapting in new ways until someone brave enough rises to confront it. What makes the Vampire Court so memorable is how each member reveals a different shadow of immortality. To live forever is tempting, but it also breeds cruelty when untempered. The Empress manipulates because eternity without affection is unbearable. The Hierophant clings to order because eternity without rules feels meaningless. The Fool laughs because eternity without purpose must be filled with noise. The Moon waits because eternity without urgency requires patience that mortals cannot imagine. Their villainy is born not just from hunger, but from the curse of endless time. And so in these figures, Adventure Time shows us yet another face of Oo's villain. They are not driven by loneliness or imbalance or cosmic punishment. They are driven by the emptiness of eternity. Their backstories are not only histories of blood, but histories of waiting, surviving, and bending the world towards their endless appetites. The saga of the Vampire Court is not only a tale of predators and power, but also of Marceline's confrontation with her own shadows. Each vampire she faced forced her to see a reflection of something she might have become if her path had tilted differently. Against the Empress, she was tempted by the ease of letting charm replace sincerity, of manipulating rather than connecting. Against the Hierophant, she was challenged by tradition itself, a voice that told her she should accept the ancient ways of dominance because they had always been so. Against the Fool, she was mocked with chaos, tested to see if she would break into the same cruel laughter when life turned senseless. And against the Moon, she was asked if she had the patience to endure hunger and solitude forever without being devoured by them. These were not just battles of fist and fang. They were battles of spirit. Marceline fought them not only with her axe base and her vampire strength, but with her will to remain herself. She refused to become a copy of their villainy. In that refusal, she carved her own identity, one that did not deny her vampiric nature, but reshaped it. She became a protector instead of a predator, a wanderer who carried songs instead of silence. The Vampire Court's backstory is therefore inseparable from Marceline's. Their villainy defined her path, and her resistance defined theirs. What makes the court so unsettling is how fully they embody different strategies of control. The Empress represents the weaponization of beauty and desire, bending others to her will through allure. The Hierophant represents authority, demanding obedience in the name of tradition. The Fool represents the destabilization of reason, breaking people down through ridicule and confusion. The Moon represents inevitability, the idea that resistance is pointless because time will always win. Together they formed a council of shadows, a reminder that villainy is never one-dimensional. It adapts, it shifts, it comes at us from many angles. And yet the court fell. One by one, Marceline defeated them, absorbing their powers until she became the last vampire left standing. This victory is legendary in Oo's history, but it is not a simple triumph. By carrying their powers, Marceline also carried their shadows. Their influence lived on in her memories and in the abilities she inherited. This complicates their backstory in a unique way. Even in defeat, their villainy lingered, woven into the very being of the hero who destroyed them. When we look back at Ash, Ricardio, and the Vampire Court together, a thread begins to form. These are villains of intimacy and betrayal. Ash wounded Marceline's heart directly, choosing power over love. Ricardio embodied the grotesque shadow of desire, reducing affection to possession. The vampire court tested Marceline against the many faces of immortality's hunger. Each of them reminds us that villainy does not always come from cosmic wars or elemental imbalance. Sometimes it comes from the people closest, from love twisted, desire corrupted, or tradition turned into chain. Their stories also remind us that performance often hides cruelty. Ash performed the role of a partner while secretly betraying Marceline. Ricardio performed the role of a refined suitor while hungering for Princess Bubblegum's heart. The Empress performed affection. The Hierophant performed authority. The Fool performed laughter. And the Moon performed patience. But behind each performance lay emptiness, hunger, or control. These villains wore masks, not because they wanted to entertain, but because masks make it easier to hide cruelty until it is too late. Adventure Time lingers on these lessons because they are closer to our own lives than cosmic tyrants like the Lich or Orgalorg. We may never face an undead council of vampires, but we understand betrayal from someone we trusted. We may never meet a talking heart with sharp teeth, but we know what it feels like when affection is twisted into control. We may never duel the Empress or the Fool, but we recognize how charm or mockery can be used to manipulate. Their backstories may be fantastical, but the truths they reveal are intimate and familiar. The vampire court's end does not erase their significance. They remain in Marceline's songs, in the lessons she carries forward, in the scars that shape how she loves and protects. Ash, Ricardio, and the vampires are villains who leave echoes, reminding us that the deepest wounds often come not from distant enemies, but from those who step too close. As we prepare to move on from this gallery of tricksters, rulers, and warbringers, we see clearly how villainy in Ooh is layered. Some villains destroy with fire, others with loneliness, and still others with charm and betrayal. Their backstories are not only tales of what they did, but warnings of how easily trust can become a weapon. From here, the tale turns toward the final category of villain, modern threats and hidden figures, those who emerge in the newer chapters of Oo's history. They are not defined by centuries of legend or ancient curses, but by choices made in the present. In them, we find shadows of betrayal, reflections of heroes, and cosmic echoes of the oldest evil. These are the villains who remind us that history is still unfolding, and that Oo's story, like the night, always has another depth waiting just beyond the horizon. The history of Ooh is filled with ancient tyrants, shadowed tricksters, and elemental rulers. Yet not all villainy belongs to the distant past. Some of it arises closer to the present, shaped by the changing tides of the world and the choices of those who inherit its burden. These are the modern threats and the hidden villain, figures who step forward not from legend or prophecy, but from within the unfolding story itself. Their backstories remind us that evil is not only something remembered, but something still alive, still evolving, still testing the fragile peace of Ooh. The first of these is Patient Saint Pim, the elemental of ice, whose tale we brushed against earlier in the story of Imbalance. While Ice King's tragedy was born from a cursed crown, Patience is different. She does not borrow her power from an artifact. She is ice itself, an elemental incarnate, a being whose body and spirit are the same. Her villainy does not come from forgetting who she was, but from remembering too much of what the world once had been. Patience's story begins long before Finn and Jake were born. In the time of the elementals, when fire, candy, slime, and ice worked together to maintain harmony, she stood as a guardian of stillness. Yet even then her nature carried shadows. Ice can preserve, but it can also trap. It can protect, but it can also suffocate. Patience saw herself as the anchor of balance, the one who could hold the world steady. But as time moved forward and the world changed, she refused to move with it. Her flaw was not cruelty in the traditional sense, but rigidity. She wanted the world to remain frozen in the shapes she understood, and she was willing to force it if she must. When she awakens from her frozen slumber in the modern age, she finds a world transformed beyond recognition. The Mushroom War has remade the land, Kingdoms have risen and fallen, and the balance she once knew is gone. To most, this would be a moment to adapt, to learn, to grow alongside the new. But patience cannot. Her backstory is one of fixation, of holding to an ancient memory so tightly that it becomes a weapon. She schemes to restore the old order by reawakening the other elementals, believing that only by recreating the past can harmony return. This is where her villainy shines most clearly. Patience does not want to destroy like the Lich, nor to conquer like Flame King. She wants to rewind. Her power is nostalgia sharpened into tyranny. She mistakes memory for destiny, treating the present as wrong simply because it does not match the patterns of yesterday. Her icy nature reflects this perfectly. She does not rage or burn. She freezes, insists, and demands stillness. In her hands, balance is no longer a partnership, but a prison. What makes patience compelling is that her villainy carries a whisper of sincerity. She believes she is helping. She believes that if the world could just return to the old patterns, peace would follow. Yet, Adventure Time shows us that peace built on control is fragile. Patience may wrap her intentions in the language of harmony, but her actions reveal otherwise. She strips the world of its freedom, demanding that it sit still beneath her cold vision. In her backstory, we see how even the pursuit of balance can become monstrous if it is pursued without compassion. Her story is also a reflection of Ice King's tragedy, though the two are not the same. Simon's villainy was not chosen. He was broken by the crown. Patience chooses her path. She has the clarity to act, the memory to guide her, and the power to shape the world. Yet she uses all of it to cling rather than to grow. In her, we see the danger of refusing change. Whereas Simon's story evokes sympathy, Patience's evokes caution. She is a villain shaped not by loss, but by refusal. And so, Patience St. Pym stands as one of Oo's modern threats, a reminder that not all villainy is ancient. Sometimes it is born anew from old ideas resurfacing in the present to test whether the world has learned from its past. Her backstory is not about how she fell, but about how she froze, choosing stillness over growth, memory over possibility, and control over compassion. Fern's story is perhaps the most heartbreaking of Oo's modern villains because it does not begin in malice at all. It begins in reflection, quite literally. Fern is a mirror of Finn, born from the grass sword's curse and the merging of magic with flesh. Where most villains of Ooh come from outside forces or ancient inheritance, Fern is different. He is born from within the hero himself, a living echo of Finn's form, his voice, and even his memory. At first, Fern struggles not with hatred, but with identity. Imagine being made in the likeness of another, carrying their memories, but not their history, their face, but not their name. To the people of Ooh, Fern looked like Finn, but felt somehow different. He was never simply seen for himself, always compared, always shadowed. And in that constant comparison, resentment began to take root. His villainy does not spring forth as cruelty at once. It grows slowly, out of the ache of not belonging. Fern longs to be Finn, yet he cannot. He tries to act the hero, but doubts creep into every moment. He tries to protect, but the whispers of the grass sword coil around him, reminding him that he is not whole. His backstory is not one of ambition like Gumbald, or nostalgia like Patience. It is one of fractured selfhood. He is a copy searching for a purpose that is already taken. What makes Fern so compelling is how clearly he reflects Finn's own struggles. Finn has always wrestled with the questions of identity, his human nature. In a world of mutants and candy folk, his purpose in battles that often seemed larger than him. His place, a story that began long before his birth. Fern carries all those questions, but without the grounding of true experience. He is memory without past, echo without voice. And so his path bends toward bitterness, because bitterness feels like proof of existence. As his resentment deepens, Fern begins to see Finn not as a brother, but as an enemy. The very boy whose shape gave him life becomes the obstacle to his identity. His villainy, then, is rooted in jealousy. Jealousy of a life he cannot truly have. Jealousy of friendships that see Finn as real and Fern as false. Jealousy of the warmth that forever slips through his fingers. This is what makes him dangerous. Not because he is fueled by some ancient curse, but because his pain is so close to human. The tragedy of Fern is that He is not wrong to want recognition. He is not wrong to want a life of his own. But the way he seeks it, by trying to replace Finn rather than accept himself, turns his yearning into violence. He becomes destructive, not because he loves destruction, but because he cannot find any other way to be seen. His backstory reminds us that villainy can come, not from hatred of others, but from hatred of oneself. In his later confrontations with Finn, we see this paradox play out. Finn does not want to destroy Fern. He wants to help him, to guide him, to see him as more than just a shadow. But Fern cannot accept that kindness. To him, it feels like pity, another reminder that he will never stand as equal. And so every attempt at reconciliation twists into further bitterness. His villainy grows, not because it is nurtured, but because every act of compassion feels like salt on the wound of his identity. Fern's backstory ties deeply into one of Adventure Time's quietest themes, the danger of self-rejection. Where villains like Patience cling too tightly to the past, Fern cannot cling to anything at all. He rejects his own being, and in doing so, spirals into becoming what he fears most, a hollow echo defined only by conflict. He does not want to be the enemy, but when the world cannot see him as anything else, he steps into the role as though it is the only costume left to wear. And yet, just like so many villains of Ooh, Fern's story carries a note of sorrow alongside the menace. His villainy is not laughter, nor hunger, nor cold ambition. It is grief. Grief for a self he never truly had. Grief for the friendships that were never fully his. Grief for the life that was always lived by someone else. His backstory is a reminder that the line between hero and villain can be as thin as a reflection in water, distorted, fragile, and heartbreakingly easy to shatter. Fern's path toward villainy unfolds like a slow collapse. At first he is restless, caught between wanting to be Finn and wanting to be himself. But as his frustrations deepen, the fractures within him spread wider. The grass sword that helped create him still pulses with alien will, whispering in his veins, shaping his choices. He begins to act out, not because he enjoys cruelty, but because cruelty feels like the only thing that cannot be mistaken for Finn. When he lashes out, when he chooses violence, at least then he is undeniably different. His confrontations with Finn become the heart of the struggle. To Finn, Fern is a brother, a strange duplicate who deserves compassion and understanding. Finn remembers what it feels like to be lost, to be unsure, to not know where you belong. But Fern cannot see that empathy without suspicion. Every kind word sounds like pity. Every offer of help feels like a reminder that he is incomplete. In this way, their bond frays until it snaps. Fern transforms from reflection into rival, not because Finn abandoned him, but because he could not accept being seen as less. The tragedy sharpens when Fern begins to fall deeper under the sword's influence. His body shifts, his form twisting into something more monstrous. The green glow that once seemed strange but human becomes the eerie shine of corruption. In this, Fern's backstory aligns with one of Ooh's recurring lessons. When identity is rejected, something else will fill the void. For Fern, that something is the curse, a consuming hunger that offers him strength, even as it erodes what little selfhood he possessed. When Fern fully embraces the role of Finn's enemy, the battles between them are more than duels of sword and shield. They are symbolic confrontations between self-acceptance and self-rejection, between growth and bitterness. Finn fights not only to stop Fern's destruction, but to remind him that he does not need to be defined by envy. Yet Fern resists until his final moment, clinging to the idea that if he cannot be Finn, he must be the opposite, even if that opposite means becoming a villain. What makes Fern's story resonate so deeply is how it mirrors the audience's own struggles with identity. Unlike cosmic monsters or ancient vampires, Fern's villainy feels close to home. It is born of comparison, insecurity, and the desperate need to be seen as enough. His backstory whispers a quiet truth. Sometimes the hardest enemy to face is the shadow in our own reflection. Eventually, Fern's arc reaches its sorrowful close. Though he falls, though his body fades, he is not remembered as only a villain. His story lingers as a cautionary tale, reminding Ooh and us that even those who stray into darkness can do so from wounds rather than malice. Fern's villainy is as fragile as fierce, a flame fueled by grief that could never quite become peace. From Fern's personal tragedy, the tale expands outward once again into the cosmic scale. For just as Fern represents the struggle of selfhood, U also contends with villains who embody forces beyond individuality. These are the cosmic antagonists, beings whose existence stretches beyond kingdoms, beyond family, even beyond the planet itself. They are reminders that U, for all its candy-colored whimsy, rests beneath skies where ancient hungers drift among the stars. The most profound of these is Golb, the monstrous embodiment of chaos and discord. If the Lich is death given form, then Golb is disorder incarnate, the collapse of meaning, the unraveling of structure itself. Its backstory is shrouded in mystery, for Golb is not a king or an elemental. It is a principle, a cosmic truth that cannot be destroyed, only endured. When it appears, reality itself seems to crack, sounds distort, shapes warp, and all sense of safety dissolve. The connection between Golb and U's villains is subtle but undeniable. Many of them, in their hunger or despair, echo fragments of Golb's nature. The fool's chaos, the tree witch's bargain, Fern's collapse. All of these are small mirrors of Golb's greater discord. In this way, the cosmic antagonists are not only threats in themselves, they are also the shadows cast by every smaller villain. Their backstory is written in the cracks of the universe, in the reminder that even in a land of candy and song, there are forces that hunger for dissolution. To face Golb is not only to battle a monster, it is to battle the unraveling of meaning itself. And in the moments when U trembles beneath that cosmic presence, we see clearly how every villain's story, whether born of bitterness, ambition, or loneliness, ultimately ties back to the greater truth that all life must struggle to endure in the face of chaos. Golb's presence in U is unlike any other villain, where Gumbald rages with resentment, Orgalorg plots with ancient pride, and Fern aches with jealousy. Golb does not feel at all. It does not argue or tempt or mock. It is silence made monstrous. Its backstory is not the tale of a life lived, but of a principle given form. The principle that everything ordered eventually falls into disorder, that every song eventually slips out of tune, that every kingdom one day crumbles back into dust. When Golb enters the story, the air itself bends. Its massive form hovers above the land, part creature, part cosmic distortion. Its flesh is shifting, its face alien and expressionless, its body more like an idea than an organism. The moment it arrives, even U's silliest corners fall quiet. For this is not just another villain to fight. This is the very concept of chaos, pressing down upon a fragile world. And yet Golb's backstory does not come in words. It is whispered through the way reality bends in its presence. Ancient scrolls describe it in fragments, strange symbols sketched by hands that trembled. Orgalorg once longed to command it, but could not. Even the Lich, so absolute in his hunger for death, feels like an echo beside Golb's discord. For Golb is not destruction in the sense of ending. It is destruction in the sense of unraveling. What it touches does not simply die. It loses its shape, its meaning, its identity. This makes Golb the ultimate mirror of U's villainy. Every smaller threat reflects a piece of it. The Lich embodies the final silence that follows. The tree witch echoes its hunger for essence. Ricardio mirrors its twisting of love into grotesque possession. Fern shows its unraveling of self, the collapse of identity into confusion. Each villain, in their own way, is a shadow cast by Golb's larger truth, that all things can fall apart if not held together by love, memory, and care. And yet, Golb's arrival also becomes the stage for one of U's most poignant victories. Not a victory of swords or fire, but of song. When Simon, Betty, and the heroes of Ur confront Golb, they realize that brute force cannot defeat a principle. What can stand against chaos is not a weapon, but meaning itself. Music, memory, sacrifice, and love, these are the threads strong enough to hold shape against unraveling. Betty's choice, though tragic, becomes a shield. By binding herself to Golb, She reshapes chaos into something that carries her will. It is not a perfect triumph, but it is enough to save the world. In this moment, we see the final lesson of villainy in Ooh. No matter how strange, no matter how terrifying, every shadow is answered not with the greater shadow, but with light. Love answers bitterness. Memory answers chaos. Compassion answers envy. These answers are not always neat, nor are they permanent. Gumbald may rise again, Orgalorg may stir, Fern's sorrow may echo in future hearts, but the answers remain, ready to be sung once more, like lullabies carried across generations. And so when we look back across every villain's backstory, the Lich's birth in nuclear fire, Ice King's fall into loneliness, Flame King's tyranny of inheritance, Gumbald's bitter betrayal, Orgalorg's cosmic disguise, the Tree Witch's quiet hunger, Ash's selfish cruelty, Ricardio's grotesque obsession, the Vampire Court's eternal predation, Patient St. Pim's frozen nostalgia, Fern's jealous reflection, and Golb's cosmic unraveling. We see a tapestry of shadows, each one different, yet all teaching the same truth, that villainy in Ooh is never just about power. It is about what happens when love is forgotten, when balance is lost, when selfhood collapses, when memory hardens into chain. But Adventure Time, for all its darkness, never leaves us only with shadows. It reminds us that even in the presence of cosmic monsters, even in the face of villainy old and new, there is always light. Heroes may stumble, friendships may fracture, songs may falter, but meaning endures. The very act of telling these backstories, of remembering who these villains were and why they became what they did, is itself a form of light, holding their stories that they cannot simply dissolve into chaos. And now, as our long journey through Ooh's villains comes to a close, the world grows quiet. The fire in the hearth burns low. The shadows of ancient monsters retreat into memory. And the kingdoms of candy, ice, slime, and flame settle into uneasy but lasting rest. Outside, the night is deep, and the stars hang like lanterns over the sleeping land. The villains may one day return, as shadows always do, but for now, Ooh breathes in peace. And so, sleepyheads, let us close the story here. Every villain has had their tale told. Every shadow its moment in the lantern's light. Rest easy knowing that even in the strangest corners of Ooh, where monsters and tricksters roam, love and meaning always remain strong enough to endure. Good night.